that what we are dealing with in Barbados at the moment, in my view, is a very serious eradication, or should I say, an ongoing serious eradication of trust. Trust is extremely
Eradication of what? I missed the last
Trust.
word.
Trust.
Trust.
trust, TRUST, trust. It all began, and I know we won't be addressing certain subjects in this platform because of what has transpired before, so I won't even venture to that. But it began a few years ago when we had to deal with certain global issues that we found ourselves as people who elected a government compromising, or our government compromising national values and our liberties under the guise of a certain number of things, and I'll just leave it at that. In terms of the matter that addresses the Deputy Prime Minister, I want to say that this is, for me, a very personal challenge. And the reason I say that is because I had a mother that worked very closely with Santia's father and taught in his school. Actually, I think headed his school at one time, if my memory serves me correctly. And so it becomes a very challenging, emotional issue to have to address it. But I will say it this way. I remember my introduction to politics, and as well, you would probably recall this, and I'm sure Maxine would have been well into politics when I was a child. I think I give away a couple of years to you. So, um, okay. Are you picking me up okay? You guys are getting me right? Because I've seen a comment there.
You're
Yeah,
coming.
we're
Okay,
hearing
because
you. It's just sometimes the last words, because of your throat, I think that's
yeah,
the issue.
okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm not using the headpiece from the phone. I'm using a microphone actually. But I remember, Caswell, you would recall that it was the showing of a series of checks in 1976
Yeah.
that cost
Brother
the
Ali.
then government the elections. I don't know if Maxine will recall
Send me
that.
brother Allen.
Yes. And I listened very carefully also to the last show. I think it was, if my mind serves me correctly, Marcia, was last night. I listened to that show too, which again I felt was very detailed. I'm not even going to try to follow in Caswell's footsteps. That's the truth. His presentation has been so detailed and brilliant that it would be a failure of an attempt to me to try to follow Caswell. Not much I could even add or deal with, because he's pretty well dealt with the majority of things I would have addressed, and he has dealt with them in such detail that's incredible. But what I understand from what I believe you shared, Caswell, was the matter of the law. And to me, I remember some years ago when I worked with BMW, we had a situation where one of the guys who wanted to purchase one of our vehicles, which could only accommodate 4 people, but he wanted to do it under an HL license, not under a taxi license. And the HL regulations called for 5 persons, the driver and 4 individuals. But our limousine could only accommodate the driver and 3. And myself, my colleague at the time, now passed away, Johnny Chuda, and the gentleman went to see the minister. I believe it was Rommel Marshall at the time. And we went to see him. And sitting in that meeting was a gentleman whose name I will not call. But he was the technical person in the ministry, in the ministry that covered the licenses and so on. Ministry of Transport and Works, I think it was called at the time. And after having gone through all that we had to go through with the regulations and so forth, it was becoming apparent that the minister was prepared to, because of the type of vehicle we were dealing with, he was prepared to maybe give an exception. And I would never forget what that gentleman said. He turned to the minister and he said, "Mr. Minister, the law is the law." That was exactly how he put it. The law is the law. In other words, there can be no exceptions. The law is the law. If that is the case, the law is the law. And it's now left to see what the law will do, what investigations will occur. And if the allegations are correct, then the law is the law. And I would say that knowing her father, if there is a question concerning her credibility and integrity, then it would be necessary for her to do the right thing. And I will just leave it at that. But it's a challenging aspect for me because of the very close, and to be honest with you, it's challenging having to deal with the Barbados Labour Party under these conditions, knowing that my family has been an extended, and Caswell, you know this, my entire family has been involved with the Barbados Labour Party from the time I can remember myself. My mother sat on the national executive with Tom Adams, and she was one of the people strongly behind
I'm with me.
And exactly, and she was one of the people who recommended Owen Arthur in St. Peter. She stood firmly behind so many things. My sister was a career diplomat for the government in Toronto, Canada, vice consul, I believe, to Toronto at one stage. My brother would have run for the Barbados Labour Party, the only person who had the guts at the time to come up against Errol Barrow in the, I think that would have been the 86 elections or something like that. I don't recall. We have a long history of the Labour Party. And so for me now to have to sit here and treat to the Barbados Labour Party in this way makes me feel that it's not the party that I used to know. I made a couple of notes as people were speaking, and I wanted to say, and I think, Maxine, you encapsulated it as well, but I made a note this way. It is difficult to identify the good things that the government has achieved when one is faced with such an overwhelming plethora of negatives. It's hard to find the good things that they have done. And I would like to probably begin by making a couple of comments, a couple of things. I joined this show at your invitation, Marcia, and I felt the need to do it because I was very concerned with the direction Barbados was taking when it came to matters of gender identity. And it came to a headway with me when the comprehensive sexuality education scandal was exposed in our primary schools. And I wondered how in the name of God could the Inter-American Development Bank implement a educational process in our schools and the Ministry of Education not be aware of it. And that to me was the first thing that in my mind should have called for the resignation of the Minister of Education, because it would have been a dereliction of duty to my mind. Because Maxine mentions about management, and Maxine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at the end of the day, it goes to the head of the stream. When something happens in a company, the employers don't get fired, the CEO and the managers get fired. When you screw up and mess up, the top people get fired for messing up the company's portfolio and bringing failure to the company's productivity, etc. And, to have gone through that entire debacle and nothing whatsoever was done, that's the first thing that sent up red flags for me and began to show to me that this government is increasingly devoid of transparency and accountability. The second thing that happened, I don't know if you all would recall, but there was this issue to do with the bathrooms at a school in St. Philip.
Yes.
That the Minister of Education denied that there were any such same-sex bathrooms in any of the schools in Barbados. And yet the same cameras that went to St. Philip with her, when they scanned the area, you could have seen clearly on camera the sign up for the same-sex capability on a door. And then we have the pictures taken by parents and students. And again, nothing was done. There was no accountability, no sanctioning, Absolutely no explanations, nothing was forthcoming, just an arrogant, obnoxious minister of education. Now, I don't know the lady. I don't know how well Caswell may know her. I don't know how well Maxine may know her, but I find her to be an obnoxious, arrogant individual who is not prepared to accept responsibility for anything that she does when it's wrong. And I was extremely annoyed within the context of that. Then the third thing I wanted to point out, which probably I should have begun with, was the elections of 2022, held in the midst of a state of emergency, held in the midst of a pandemic, knowing that you had over 50,000 people who were eligible to vote that could not vote unless special provision was made for those individuals to vote. And Maxine, I have always respected your political views, because I've always seen you a bit like how I view my sister, being a person who considers values more than your political connections. And when I looked at, because I don't know if you remember that it was about the same time the Bahamas had elections.
Yes.
And the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, I don't recall his name right now, he made provision for every single quarantined individual to vote in that election. And I asked myself the question, why could something similar not have been done here in Barbados? Especially when we are given the fact that in many of our constituencies, sometimes it's only a couple of votes that can determine whether the Barbados Labour Party gets a seat or the Democratic Labour Party gets a seat. I think you'll remember, Caswell, the situation in St. Peter some years ago with Sybil Leacock, I think it was. Sybil Leacock with one vote or two votes or something like that. So here we have an election called during a pandemic, during a state of emergency. Now, I don't know the legality of that or the constitutionality of that. I don't know, because in my lifetime, I have never been through a state of emergency. That was the first time I had ever encountered anything called a state of emergency. But I felt that it was a deliberate act to deny a large percentage of the Barbadian public who were eligible for election the right to vote. And I believe the information has borne that out, in that we now have a government that has been elected to office with the smallest percentage of the electorate ever in the history of Barbados. So that is the third thing I wanted to touch on. The illegitimacy of the general election, the thousands of Barbadians that were denied. And then we have the matter of recent days of the Samoa Agreement. And everything was proceeding along really nice and dandy till it was raised here. You will recall, Caswell, it was raised here on this show. And we brought it up because in that agreement, even though the government repeatedly denied, remember the Minister of Foreign Affairs denying it, I remember the representative for St. James North getting up and talking most disingenuously concerning members of this show, persons who were on this show. And then I remember the Prime Minister herself threatening us, and I took it personally, threatening us with this whole aspect of treasonous conduct or conversation or whatever, denying the fact that there was a connection between the agreement, the signing of the agreement, and sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual health, and those matters. And they tried to explain it away by referring to I don't recall how the Minister of State and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated it now, but putting it out as though there are agreements, but people have different ways of treating to them, and there was no obligation on the government of Barbados' part to embrace the European Union's view on sexual orientation and gender identity. But then, we heard the matter, or should I say, but then we never got explanation from the government as to what is their definition of sexual health, what is their definition what is their view with regards to sexual education in our primary schools and so on. We never heard a definitive statement with regards to that. Then I can move on to another thing very quickly, and that is you touched on it, or should I say you didn't touch on it, you dealt with it quite well, I thought, and that's the matter of the national debt. And again, Maxine, you addressed that again. My mother always used to tell me you can't borrow yourself out of debt. That was what my mom told me all the time. If you keep borrowing money to get yourself out of debt, all you do for it is dig a deeper hole of debt. And so what she said to me is that if you want to get out of debt, you're going to have to increase your income. You're going to have to look for a job that makes you more money, so that if you have to borrow more money to consolidate your loans, that's what I was taught. Maxine, I don't know if I am right. I'm not a financial guru by any stretch of the imagination. But my mother used to talk to us about consolidating debt so that you could probably reduce the amount of monthly payment. But she made it clear you had to up your income. You had to increase your income. The challenge I have is that I now have grandchildren, 6 of them. And we are now 73. Let me make sure I get the figure correct. I think as of this year, we are somewhere in the ballpark of $73 billion US in debt. I think it's somewhere in that ballpark. I stand to be corrected. I think it's 73. Is it 73 or 7.3 billion? Kimar had it out there. I think it might be 7.3 billion US dollars in debt. But anyhow, I'm sure Kamar will clarify and correct me if necessary. But regardless of the amount, the fact of the matter is that we keep borrowing money. Every time I open the newspapers, all I see is that we are borrowing. And we are being told that our foreign reserves are good. But our foreign reserves are being made up from, particularly what Kamar has educated me in, is being made up from the money we are borrowing and not from the income we are generating. And I agree with you, Maxine. I know, I think I know the CEO of Export Barbados reasonably well. He's supposed to be a minister as well. I don't mean a minister of government. I mean a minister of religion. And we have always had good relationship and good conversation. But I am challenged to see, where is Barbados earning, thank you so much, 7.33 billion US dollars. Where is Barbados earning the income to pay the debt? And if we're not earning income to pay the debt, what does that say to us for the future of Barbados? And I'm really very, very concerned. I won't say worried, because as a Christian minister, I shouldn't be worried, because the Bible cautions me to be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication to let God know my requests. And believe you me, we have been praying for this country in and out. Maxine and Caswell, we have a group that meets 5 days a week, 5 o'clock to 6:30. We pray nonstop for the well-being of this country. And I don't ever intend to stop, because I believe that the answer to this nation lies squarely in our values and belief systems, which have to supersede our political connections. And I actually made the note here on my paper, morals and values versus politics, because I believe this is where we are at right now. We have to decide whether we are going to follow values and morals or follow politics. We have to make that decision. Just let me run down through here. And then, of course, we had the matter of the Child Protection Bill, which again, let me before I even touch it, let me just slip back to the Trident ID card. You remember when this Trident ID card, Caswell, was discussed? The Attorney General came out in either October or November and said that Barbadians did not have to take this ID card. As a matter of fact, at the very beginning, we were told we had to. We were told that at the very beginning. Then it seemed to drop into the arena of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, which I couldn't fathom how it got into that as a national ID card, how it got onto the portfolio of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. But we were told we had to get this new card, and people were lining up to try and get the card. Then the Attorney General comes out and tells us that it's not necessary for us to get the ID card. And And that was a statement, plain and straightforward. Am I correct, or am I wrong?
You're going back to the 100 reply.
He said it straight. Within a couple of weeks, the prime minister came out and said we have to get the national ID card, and that the national ID card would not have to be pinned. I remember these statements very clearly, because the issue that is being raised with the national ID card is not the ID card aspect. It is the pinning of the ID card aspect. And people don't seem to grasp what's going down here. Because when you pin a card, even when you pin your bank card, what you are doing is through that little piece of plastic, you're giving the bank authorization to your account in every way, shape, or form. People need to read the fine print. When they are getting these cards, they come with a connection on them that tells you what the bank's rights are and what your rights are. And I realize that very few people read anything to do with what is on those, what is required when you have a card. And as an automotive person, I can tell you, most of the time people don't read nothing they get. You know how many people drove back into the Warren's Motors with their BMWs to me and tell me that the car don't have this, the car don't. And I asked them, have you read the manual? They said, no. I said, well, how do you expect to know what the car has if you haven't read the manual? You know, there were people who came back in and didn't know that if you press the unlock button on a BMW that you could lower all four windows at the same time. And they were telling me that you could do that with Mercedes, but BMW didn't have it. But BMW was the first luxury brand to have it. But they didn't read the manual. And sometimes we go get these cards and we activate them. We don't even know what the rights of the bank are. And so here we are now, being asked to pin an ID card and not even being told when you pin it, what are the ramifications of pinning that card? It's almost like it is a secret. And then the Prime Minister comes out now to create even more confusion. She comes out now and says that, and sorry, the minister, is it Minister Ishmael something?
Yeah. Davison Ishmael.
Davison Ishmael. You remember he came out and said, or he was trying to put a lie to our idea that you can't track the card, you can't track using the card. Yet in the same breath, he could speak of tracking the movement of the elderly on the buses to be able to know how, when when they're moving most of the time. If you can't track using the card, you can't track, period. If you can track the movement of the elders, it means the card can be tracked. It's as simple as that. And as a matter of fact, we're now told that the elderly cannot use the card on the bus unless it is pinned. And it is the pinning that makes it possible to track the movements of the individual with that card. And you're going to tell me that it can't be tracked? How ludicrous can you be? And then the Prime Minister comes out and talks about the fact that there are variations of services for those that are pinned and a variation of services, a differentiation of services for those that are not pinned. So which is it? Exactly what is it? And it therefore it's not homegrown. That's the bottom line. It's not homegrown. And there are a lot of things about this ID card that do not relate to us as a people in Barbados. A lot of things. Go and talk with Australia. United States has already said it ain't happening in America. They're not permitting it in the United States. Australia is pushing back against it. The UK is pushing back against it themselves. So obviously there are questions surrounding this matter of the ID card when a country like the United States is not going to embrace it and endorse it, but Barbados ready to grab it and hold it to their bosom as if it is life itself. And let me just end then by speaking to the matter of the Child Protection Bill. I am not a very detailed person in these. I tend to, get a overview. That is why I was so appreciative of what Maxine shared this evening and what Caswell shared, because they're very detailed. And I really have been so appreciative, and thank you all for helping me to learn and understand so much of what is involved in all of this. Let me end by the matter of the Child Protection Bill. And I wouldn't even venture to get into detail on this because I believe, from an attorney's standpoint, we have had a couple of attorneys address this. But clearly, the Child Protection Bill, there are questions that are up in the air to be answered. And I believe a lot of this has to do with this sexual orientation and gender identity agenda that is being pushed across the world, led by the United States, pushed into the European Union, and now trying to be pressed upon all of the countries of the world. And I'm grateful for countries in Africa that are simply saying, no, can't work here, can't do here in our countries. So I'm really here again you have the government trying to, I call it, I like the word Maxine used, stealth. I don't know what caused her to use that one, but stealth. You're trying to get this sexual orientation and gender identity acceptance in through the back door with this Overseas Employment Act or whatever it is, so that now you're opening up the country to what they call them again, Caswell, not same sex couples. They have a different name for it, so that it did not intrude upon our demeanor. But it's the same thing, and it's coming in through the back door, being slipped in at a time we are.
You're punning.
Oh, okay. So I am. Sorry.
I said, Caswell, no, you go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let me mute until I'm ready to speak.
So, I mean, these, when I look, therefore, Marcia had asked me, when I look at the performance of the government down through the year, I went to school at Harrison College. And down through the year, we used to get something called, I can't remember what they used to call it, Caswell, but there were cards. I think you're a Combamere, and I don't know if I had the same process at Combamere, but we were a little more advanced than you all were. But anyhow, so we used to get this card that every certain number of weeks, it would be completed, and I had to bring it home and show it to my mother. And my mother had to sign it. This came in before we got our report card at the end of the year. And those cards would carry grade from A to F, and A plus and C minus. You remember all those things? If I had to grade the government at the moment, I would have to grade them with an F minus. And I think if you got an F on your report card, my mother being an educator, my backside was warmed emphatically. And Maxine, this is why I grew not to like Mercedes-Benz and to have a preference for BMW, because my mother had a long strap, piece of leather, straight on one end, serrated on the other, and she called it the Mercedes. And I got a lot of those Mercedes. So maybe that is why I have an affinity to BMW and objection to Mercedes. All right, so that's really my view at this point, Marcia. I didn't even expect it to be that long because I wasn't sure that my voice could have survived it. I tried preaching this morning on my virtual service, and it was really a massive challenge. But I said I had to push through to be here with you tonight. And to be able to say to you and Maxine and Caswell, Kimar, we wish all of you and all of our official opposition, a happy new year and a prosperous 2024 for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Marcia,
Thank you so much. I was muted. Thank you so much, Reverend. Thank you. I wasn't on screen for all of it, but I was listening. I had to take care of something here. But as this is not the normal time that we have our show, but again, very well researched, and I thank you for taking the time. It's a strain on your voice, and you still have service and all of that at your church, and you came here this evening, and we appreciate you, Reverend. I was talking about you when you weren't here, that when I'm away, I know I can leave you to
Thank
moderate
you.
the program for me. And I've traveled and come back, and it's still going and growing as well. And thank you for doing a fabulous job with that. The opposition appreciates you and appreciate what you do. God bless you.
And I
And
just want to say what a pleasure and an honor it has been for me down through the past year to be able to support you and help you in that way. I look forward to an exciting 2024 as we take on what is in the best interests of the people of Barbados.